Today is the 5th day of the month of Tishrei, and we are in the middle of chapter 134, discussing the laws of building a sukkah. Today we will be doing paragraphs 7 through 12. Paragraph 7. A sukkah must be built beneath the sky. If somebody builds it under a tree, or if there are branches of a tree that will hang over the sukkah, that could make the sukkah a puzzle, a non-kosher sukkah. Now, let's say somebody has branches that they lean over the sukkah to use as the schach, as the covering for the sukkah. The branches, maybe it's some sort of vine that you could just pick it up and lay it over the sukkah. And then afterward, that wouldn't be a good schach in of itself, wouldn't be a good roof, because one of the rules that we saw is that it had to be detached from the ground. So you lay it over your sukkah, and then you snip the bottom of it, so now it's detached. Would that be a good sukkah? In that case as well, it would not be a good sukkah, even though you snip the bottom of it, because there's a rule in Hebrew called ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui, which translates into that the sukkah, the schach, you have to put down on the sukkah. It can't be put there automatically by itself. When you put these vines over the sukkah and then you snip the bottom, it's as if the schach, the roof, ended up there by itself. You have to first snip it and then put it down. Let's say somebody did put down the vines and then snip the bottom, so now they're detached from the ground. How could they kosherize the sukkah? By picking up the schach, picking up these vines and then putting them back down now after they are already detached. This rule of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'asui also necessitates they cannot put the schach down before you have walls. If you have some sort of frame for your sukkah, you then put down the roof and then you build the walls, you got a problem, because the roof became roof by default. It became a kosher sukkah by default, and therefore it's not a kosher sukkah. You have to first build the walls and then put down the roof. Paragraph 8. This paragraph discusses a sukkah which has a retractable roof. Specifically, it seems like the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is talking about a roof which is on hinges. This is actually the sukkah that I grew up in. My parents' sukkah we had an enclosed back porch which had a tin roof. It was like a tin sheets was the roof, and they were on hinges with a pulley system. When you crank the pulley system, then the roof raises up on the hinges and it stands straight up in the air. So in this scenario, because of the rule that we just learned in the previous paragraph, that you can't have the schach, the roof of the sukkah, become a roof by default, you have to build the roof of the sukkah, the schach of the sukkah, then you have to make sure to put down the schach, the branches, when the roof is open. If you put down the branches when the roof is closed, you slip it in beneath the cover of the sukkah, beneath the tin cover, the tin roof, and then you open up the tin roof, you just now create a sukkah by default. It became a sukkah on its own, not that you placed down the branches. Therefore, that would not be a kosher sukkah. However, if the roof is open and then you put down the branches, then you could close and open that tin roof without a problem. It is preferable that you do have the roof open at the onset of sukkahs, but if not, it's still a kosher sukkah. A couple more things to be careful about if you do have such a sukkah which has a shlach, a cover that covers up the sukkah. Number one, again, assuming it's on hinges, you have to make sure that when it's open fully straight, up in the air. Because if it's slanted a little bit over the sukkah, if it's a slight angle at least, it could be slanted, it could be covering part of the sukkah, and if you sit under that, that would not be sitting under a kosher sukkah. The rest of the sukkah that it's not covering might be kosher, but definitely that spot which the roof, that tin roof, whatever it's made out of, is leaning over, that would not be a kosher place to sit. In addition, if you do have a type of sukkah like I mentioned my parents had, which was an enclosed back porch that we used all year round, and on sukkahs we just open up the roof and then put the schach down. If you have a sukkah like that, it's very likely that it will require a mezuzah. Normally, a sukkah does not need a mezuzah because it's considered a temporary structure. But this is a permanent structure that you're turning into your sukkah. Therefore, it likely requires a mezuzah, and if so, speak to a competent halachic authority if you have such a sukkah. Paragraph 9. You could use a borrowed sukkah, that's fine to use. You don't have to own the sukkah. A borrowed sukkah could be kosher, but a stolen sukkah is not a kosher sukkah. Because of this, there are some authorities that say that you cannot build a sukkah on public property, because that property doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the public, And when you build your sukkah there, you're stealing that property, that area of the sukkah, from the public. So it's definitely better to not build your sukkah on public property. If you have no other option, then we could rely on the authorities that do allow it. Also, of course, if it's common practice to do it, then the public is basically giving permission to build sukkahs on the public property. And that would be okay as well. This generally would apply in Israel, where you see people building sukkahs all over the place. It's understood that the public gives permission to use any area that's needed for building a sukkah, unless, of course, obviously somebody builds it in the middle of the street or something of that sort, which would be clearly a public nuisance. Paragraph 10 further discusses a stolen sukkah, but not a stolen sukkah, rather specifically a stolen schach. If you have somebody building your sukkah, you're not sure whether he's such a trustworthy person, then you should instruct him, don't cut down the branches for the schach by yourself. Rather have somebody else cut it down and then buy it from the other person. Because that way, in case there's a chance that the place he cut the branches from, he wasn't allowed to, if you know he's stealing branches, you shouldn't let him do it. But where you don't think he's stealing branches, but you just want to be 100% certain, then if he would cut down the branches himself, it'd be considered a stolen sukkah. But due to some technicalities within halachic civil law, if somebody steals something and then sells it to somebody else, then it now belongs to that final owner. Therefore, in this case, you have all your bases covered if this person who's building a sukkah buys it from somebody else. Because even if the other person, the initial person, stole it, then still it's considered yours at the end of the day. Again, obviously, if you think this guy is a thief, you really suspect him being a thief and of stealing branches and not being honest about it, then you shouldn't be having him build your sukkah for you. Paragraph 11 is permitted to build a sukkah on Chol HaMoed, the intermediary days of Sukkot. Sukkot starts with 1 or 2 days of complete holiday. We don't drive, we don't write, we don't use electricity or turn on electricity. And then we have these intermediary days, which are still part of the Sukkot holiday, but they don't have the restrictions that the first couple of days have. So on those intermediary days, Chol HaMoed, you could build a sukkah. Paragraph 12 requires a short introduction. On Shabbos and holidays, we have a concept called muktzah, items that we're not supposed to move on Shabbos or holidays. There are different categories of muktzah. For example, one category is something which has no use in general at all. Stones and pebbles are considered generally useless, and those things we're not allowed to move on Shabbos. Another category is things that have a forbidden Shabbos use. For example, a pencil or a pen. We're not allowed to write on Shabbos, therefore a pen and pencil would be considered muktzah on Shabbos. We're not allowed to even move it. The walls and decorations of a sukkah take on this concept of muktzah. Because they're set aside for the mitzvah of sukkah, then we are not supposed to get any benefit from them until Sukkot is over. And because outside Israel we always have an extra day of the holiday, then this prohibition of muktzah would extend until the end of what we call Shmini Atzeres, the day preceding Simchas Torah. The example that the Shulchan Aruch uses is you can't break a little piece of wood off of your sukkah wall to use as a toothpick. Let's say the sukkah fell down, you can't, and you don't need it anymore, you don't want to use it anymore. You can't use the branches that were your schach, you can't use them as firewood. It's forbidden to get benefit from it the entire sukkahs. Now there's one leniency with decorations. Decorations also have this muktzah issue, this muktzah concept that they become part of the sukkah, you can't get any benefit from them. However, with the decorations, if you would say at the onset of sukkahs, I'm not setting aside these decorations to be used exclusively for the sukkah, then they could be used for other purposes over the duration of sukkahs. I'll give you a practical example. When we lived in Israel, I took some of my instruments, specifically it was a saxophone and a trombone, and I hung them on the wall of my sukkah as decorations. Then there was an event over Sukkot on Chol HaMoed when you're allowed to play instruments that I wanted to take the saxophone off the wall and play saxophone by this event. But because I didn't make that declaration at the onset of Sukkot, that saxophone became muktzah. I wasn't allowed to take it off the wall and use it for the event. Even within decorations that hang from the ceiling are more severe, and the stipulation does not generally help for decorations that hang from the ceiling. It would only work with decorations that are on the walls. Two exceptions to this. Number one, if you have an esrog, a citron hanging from the ceiling as decoration, you are allowed to smell it, even though smelling it is getting benefit from it. That's considered standard. We assume that when people hang up esrogs, they intend to be able to smell it, and that's a given. You are able to smell it over a sukkah. The other exception is delicate decorations. The example that the Shulchan Aruch gives is fancy embroidered sheets that people used to hang in the sukkah, and if it would start raining, those sheets could get ruined. Therefore, it's taken for granted that anybody hanging these delicate decorations in the sukkah, it's a given that if it would start raining and it might get ruined, they could take them off the wall and bring them inside the house to protect them from the rain. Even with these decorations, these delicate ones, it's best to say that declaration, that stipulation in the beginning of the onset of Sukkot, that I'm not designating them exclusively for the sukkah, but if one doesn't, it's still not a problem to take them off to move them. You got to be careful, however, that it wasn't attached with any sort of knot that would be forbidden to take off on Yom Tif. There are some sorts of knots, most sorts of knots, are not allowed to untie on Yom Tif, on the holiday itself, and therefore, if you would want to bring it inside on the holiday, you got to make sure that it's attached to the wall of the sukkah or the ceiling of the sukkah in a way that's permissible to take off on the holiday. This concludes today's learning. I'm sorry today was definitely a bit more technical than usual. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.